What if I told you the most terrifying force in the entire galaxy isn't a fleet of warships, a planet-destroying superweapon, or even an army of genetically engineered super soldiers? What if the single most dangerous thing an enemy could ever face is a human mother whose child has been taken from her? Across countless science fiction stories, we've marveled at humanity's resilience, our ingenuity in the face of overwhelming odds, but we seldom talk about the quiet, primal power that lies at the very heart of our species. That deep, unbreakable bond between a parent and a child. It's a force that transcends logic, defies reason, and rewrites the very rules of engagement in any conflict. Today, we're going to explore a story that doesn't just ask what makes humanity fierce. It asks what happens when you awaken something far older and far more dangerous than any soldier. Picture the vast, cold emptiness of space. Stars blink in the silent dark, countless and indifferent. And through that void, a single ship flies, not a pristine vessel fresh from the docks, but a battle-scarred survivor, its hull marked by laser burns and impact craters, a living testament to conflicts endured. This is the starship Maternal Fury. Aboard her, Commander Kaelen Vex stands on the bridge, a leader hardened by war, accustomed to impossible decisions and galactic-scale threats. But in this moment, she is just a person waiting, hoping the silence holds no bad news. Then it comes a distorted, broken transmission cutting through the static, a voice trembling with panic and despair. The message is short and utterly devastating. They took the children from the outer colony. Your son is among them. In that single, breathless instant, the universe shifts. This is no longer a story about military strategy or interstellar politics. This is something far more personal, far more human. A mission of desperation is born not from duty or orders, but from a love so fierce it becomes a weapon. The enemy who committed this act, whoever they are, however advanced or numerous, believes they have simply captured hostages. They believe they have leverage. What they do not realize, what they could never possibly understand, is that they haven't just made a tactical error. They have lit a fuse on a fury they cannot comprehend. They are not being hunted by a soldier, they are being hunted by a mother, and as we're about to see, no enemy in the cosmos is prepared for what comes next. The bridge of the Maternal Fury fell into a silence deeper than the void outside. Every officer, every veteran who had served under Commander Kaelen Vex through a dozen campaigns felt the atmosphere change. The air grew heavy, charged with a new kind of energy. It wasn't the familiar tension before a battle, it was something far more potent. Kaelen turned from the main view screen, her face a mask of calm resolve, but her eyes held a storm. She looked at her crew, her family, and when she spoke, her voice was low, measured, yet it carried to every corner of the deck with the weight of a final verdict. She didn't need to raise it. This wasn't a command to be shouted. It was a truth to be absorbed. "We are changing course," she began, her gaze sweeping over them. But understand this clearly. What we are about to undertake is not a military operation. It will not be logged. There are no orders from high command, no strategic objective for the war effort. She paused, letting the gravity of that statement settle. These were soldiers bound by duty and chain of command, and she was asking them to step outside of it entirely. "They have taken children from the outer colony of Viridia. My son is among them." A soft, collective intake of breath was the only sound. They knew the commander's son. Many had seen his holographic image on her console, a bright-eyed boy with his mother's determined smile. The Xylos, Kaelen continued, the name spoken not with hatred but with a chilling, absolute finality. They believe this is a tactical move. They see hostages, leverage, they are wrong. She leaned forward, her hands resting on the command rail. There is a law older than any galactic treaty, a code written in something deeper than DNA. It is the one universal law every species, from the highest predator to the lowest prey, instinctively understands. You do not touch the young, you do not take a human child. Her voice, that velvet covering, fell away, revealing the pure steel beneath. They have broken that law, and so we are not going to war, we are going on a retrieval. Across the bridge, hardened soldiers, men and women who had stared down plasma fire without flinching, felt a shiver that had nothing to do with fear. It was recognition. This was a call to something more ancient than their oath of service. A lieutenant at the navigation console, a woman who had lost her own family in an early Xylos raid, simply nodded, her hands already flying across her terminal. The helmsman input the coordinates without a single word of question. The order was given, not with a shout but with a quiet, unwavering command: take us there. The massive engines of the Maternal Fury groaned, power building to a crescendo that vibrated through the deck plates. Space itself seemed to warp and bend before the ship as it leapt forward, tearing into the shimmering tunnel of hyperspace, its course set unerringly for the heart of the Xylos hive cluster. They were not heading into a battle, they were delivering a reckoning. Deep within the spiraling, chitinous architecture of the Xylos hive cluster, the air hummed with a biological warmth, thick with the scent of pheromones and damp organic matter. This was the heart of the swarm, a place of perfect, ordered purpose. In her biochamber, a vast cavern lined with pulsating, veined walls, the queen observed her newest acquisitions. She was a magnificent and terrifying sight, a towering being of polished carapace and sharp, elegant limbs, her multifaceted eyes capturing the dim light of the chamber in 1,000 fractured glimmers. Before her, held in a softly glowing stasis field, were the human children. They were small, fragile things, their soft skin and quiet whimpers a stark contrast to the hard, clicking efficiency of the hive. A low, chittering vibration of satisfaction resonated in her chest. She turned her great head to address the attending brood commanders, her voice a complex symphony of clicks and modulated frequencies that her translation implants rendered into cold, galactic common. The reports from the front are accurate, their soldiers are fierce, they fight with a frustrating tenacity. She gestured with one razor-sharp limb toward the stasis field. But they are predictable, they follow their rules of engagement, their codes of honor, they can be outmaneuvered, they can be broken. She focused her attention on the children, her gaze analytical, devoid of any malevolence she might recognize as such. To her, this was simply the next logical step in a grand strategic equation. These specimens are the key. They are unmolded clay, their minds open, their biological secrets pure and unguarded. We will not just learn their physical weaknesses, we will understand the very source of their irrational resilience. We will decode the anomaly of human spirit, and we will learn to extinguish it. A wave of approving clicks echoed from her brood. It was a brilliant plan, a masterstroke. What the queen could not perceive, what her magnificent, hyper-evolved brain was utterly incapable of processing, was the fundamental flaw in her calculation. She saw the children as data points, assets to be analyzed. She saw their value in what they could reveal about the soldiers she faced. The concept that these small creatures were not merely young of a species, but that they were somebody's young, was an abstraction with no meaning in her hive-mind logic. The bond she could not quantify, the love she could not isolate in a petri dish, the primal fury she had just invoked, these were variables that did not exist in her strategic model. In her supreme confidence, she had not just miscalculated, she had, with absolute certainty, just signed the death warrant for her entire species. The extinction event was not coming from the stars. It was already en route, and its name was Valen. The transition from the shimmering non-reality of hyperspace to the stark, star-dotted blackness of normal space was marked by a deep, groaning shudder that ran through the entire length of the Maternal Fury's frame. One moment, there was only the streaked light of the warp tunnel. The next, the main view screen resolved into a horrifyingly familiar sight. the outer defensive perimeter of the Xylos hive cluster. It was a nightmarish web of organic-looking defense platforms, their surfaces living and breathing, linked by swarms of thousands of darting insectoid interceptors. The proximity alarms blared to life instantly, a shrill symphony of impending violence. The Xylos swarm, sensing the intruder, reacted with the cold, instantaneous efficiency of a single organism. A cloud of interceptors broke from their patrol patterns and surged toward the lone human ship, their movements a coordinated, predatory dance. On the bridge, the crew braced, their training kicking in. Tactical readouts flashed crimson, displaying the overwhelming odds. A young ensign at the defense console, his voice tight with the strain of the moment, began to call out the numbers. "Commander, we have multiple inbound hostile contacts, reading at least 3 full wings of interceptors, closing at attack speed. Their weapons are powering up." Orders, the question hung in the air, a request for a standard military response, evasive maneuvers, targeted defensive fire, perhaps a tactical retreat to reassess. Commander Kaelen Vex did not look at the ensign. Her eyes were fixed on the main screen, on the swarming mass that stood between her and her child. There was no hesitation. No moment of calculation. The storm that had been brewing in her eyes since the transmission now broke with a terrifying calm. Her voice, when it came, was not the shouted order of a battlefield commander. It was lower, flatter, a statement of pure, unadulterated fact that cut through the alarm klaxons like a knife. Full forward barrage. The command was simple, absolute. The weapons officer, a veteran who had served with Vex for years, paused for a fraction of a second, his hand hovering over the console. A full barrage was not a defensive measure. It was an all-in, reckless offensive move that would drain their forward shield capacitors and leave them vulnerable. It was a soldier's last resort. Kaelen's head turned slowly, her gaze meeting his. In that look, he saw the end of the soldier and the beginning of something else entirely. Her next words were for him, for the entire crew, a final clarification of their new reality. "They want a soldier's war," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, yet resonating with a power that shook the deck. "They'll get a mother's wrath." "Now fire everything." The order was executed. Across the forward hull of the Maternal Fury, massive plasma cannons that were typically used in disciplined, rotating volleys instead roared to life in a simultaneous, deafening concert of destruction. Rivers of incandescent green energy erupted from the ship, not aimed with surgical precision, but unleashed in a wide, scything arc of pure annihilation. The barrage tore into the heart of the approaching swarm. Interceptors designed for fast, elegant strikes vanished in silent blossoms of fire and shattered chitin, their coordinated formation utterly obliterated in the face of this raw, unfiltered fury. The ship shuddered violently from the recoil of its own weapons, pressing forward through the expanding cloud of debris and flame. They were not fighting to disable or to win a tactical advantage. They were cutting a path. Every exploding enemy craft was not a victory. It was merely an obstacle removed from the direct line between a mother and her son. This was not warfare as the Xylos understood it. This was a force of nature, and it was coming straight for their heart. Sergeant Rourke's voice cut through the cacophony of the bridge, a familiar anchor of reason in the storm of chaos. He was at her side in an instant, his grizzled face etched with the hard-won pragmatism of a dozen successful campaigns. He was her strategic right arm, the man she trusted to see the angle she might miss. Right now, his eyes were wide with a very specific kind of alarm, not fear of the enemy, but fear of a commander making a fatal, emotional error. Kaelen, their hive mind is a unified network. Our jammers are useless against that kind of cohesion. We can't punch through this swarm head-on. We'll be torn apart. We need to pull back, find a blind spot, use stealth. A surgical insertion is our only chance. His plea was laced with the undeniable logic of the soldier, the voice of training and survival. Kaelen didn't turn from the viewscreen. Her hands remained on the command rail, white-knuckled, her entire being focused on the path of destruction they were carving. The ship shuddered again under a fresh volley of enemy fire, shield indicators flickering a warning orange. Rourke's argument was sound. It was the correct move. It was what the manual, what any academy instructor would have demanded. But the woman on the bridge was no longer operating from that manual. The part of her that calculated acceptable losses and tactical withdrawals had been surgically removed the moment she heard her son's name on that transmission. When she finally spoke, her voice was quiet, yet it possessed a resonance that silenced the alarms in their minds. It wasn't a shout, it was something far more absolute. Stealth, she said, the word not a rebuttal but a dismissal, is for soldiers who still fear loss. She finally turned her head, and Rourke took an involuntary step back. He had seen her face in the heat of battle, grim and determined. This was different. Her expression was serene, a terrifying calm that spoke of a decision made in the deepest, most unshakable part of her soul. There was no anger there, no panic, only a chilling, infinite resolve. "I have no fear left to give them, Sergeant," she continued, her gaze holding his, stripping away his military logic and speaking to the man beneath. "They have taken everything that could ever be used as leverage against me. My fear died with that transmission. All that remains is him, and I am not a soldier trying to win a battle against a hive mind. I am a mother coming for her child, their network, their numbers, their perfect coordination. It means nothing, they are just things in my way." With that, she turned back to the helm, her order leaving no room for debate. "Take us through, all power to forward shields and engines, do not deviate." The Maternal Fury, a blade driven by a force no tactical algorithm could ever predict, plunged even deeper into the heart of the storm. Its commander a singularity of purpose against which the swarm's cold logic simply shattered. Deep within the hive, the Queen's multifaceted eyes narrowed. The human vessel was not behaving according to any known tactical profile. Its movements were not those of a military machine executing a plan. They were the direct, brutal, and unstoppable advance of a physical law. This was an anomaly her hive mind could not compute. A new variable had to be introduced, a tactic reserved for the most resilient and disruptive minds. With a series of soft, clicking commands, she summoned her most potent psychic weapon, a Xylos telepath, a being whose mind was not a single consciousness but a focused conduit for the collected anxieties and fears of the entire swarm. Aboard the Maternal Fury, Commander Valen stood unwavering as the ship shuddered under another impact. Then, a new sensation bloomed behind her eyes, a pressure, cold and invasive, utterly alien. The bridge around her flickered, the familiar consoles and crewmates dissolving like smoke. Suddenly, she was no longer on her ship. She was in a place of soft, organic light and pulsing, veined walls. And she heard it, a small, terrified whimper. There, in a glowing field of energy, was her son. His face was pale, streaked with tears, his small hands pressed against the invisible barrier of his prison. His eyes were wide with a pure, uncomprehending fear, and his voice was a broken whisper. "Mommy, I'm scared. Where are you?" The vision was perfect. It was a masterful invasion, crafted from stolen biosignatures and psychic impressions, designed to shatter the strongest will. It sought to find the core of her love and use it as a lever to pry her mind apart, to flood it with a despair so profound it would cripple her. The telepath, connected to the hive mind, fed on this projected terror, ready to amplify it and send her spiraling into helplessness, but it had made a catastrophic miscalculation. It had assumed that a mother's love was a weakness, a vulnerability to be exploited. It did not understand that this love was not a simple emotion. It was the foundation of her entire being, a forge that had tempered her will into something unbreakable. The vision of her son's fear did not evoke despair in her. It ignited the final, purifying fire of her wrath. The cold, invasive presence in her mind suddenly recoiled, not in triumph but in confusion. It had not found a mind breaking under terror. It had found a mind made of terror, a psychic maelstrom focused into a single, razor-sharp point of purpose. Valen did not try to block the intrusion. She embraced it. She grabbed hold of the psychic connection with a mental strength the telepath had never encountered, and she did not scream in fear. She poured her entire soul back down the link, not a message of words, but a raw tsunami of pure, undiluted intent. It was the memory of every lullaby sung in the dark, every scraped knee kissed better, every promise of protection made and meant. It was the absolute, terrifying certainty that she would tear apart the fabric of reality itself to reach her child. And wrapped around that core was a warning, a psychic scream that echoed through the hive mind itself, a declaration that boiled the telepath's synapses and shattered its consciousness. You think fear is a weapon. You think you can show me my child's fear and break me. I have absorbed his fear. I have consumed it. I have become it. I am not afraid of you. I am what you fear. I am fear. On the bridge, the crew saw their commander's body go rigid for a single, heart-stopping second. Then, a soundless wave of energy seemed to pulse from her, and the main view screen flickered violently. For a breathtaking moment, the entire Xylos swarm outside fell into disarray. Interceptors collided with each other, their perfect coordination vanishing as their shared network was overloaded by a feedback scream of psychic agony. The telepath aboard the hive ship did not simply disconnect. Its mind and the thousands of minds linked to it experienced a simultaneous catastrophic burnout. The path through the swarm for just a few precious seconds was clear. The storm had parted. The reckoning had a straight shot to its target. The impact was not a graceful docking procedure. It was a declaration. The Maternal Fury tore through the multi-layered organic hull of the Xylos hive with the screaming, shrieking violence of a predator ripping into its prey. The ship didn't land so much as it embedded itself, a piece of shrapnel driven deep into the living flesh of the enemy. The massive bay doors groaned open before the ship had even settled, revealing not a sterile hangar but a cavernous, pulsating chamber, its walls glistening with a viscous, biological sheen. And it was already swarming. Hundreds of Xylos warriors, alerted by the catastrophic intrusion, surged toward the breach, their chitinous limbs clicking, their razor-sharp claws extended, a living tide of polished carapace and murderous intent. From the smoke and steam of the wreckage, a single figure emerged to meet them. It was Commander Kaelen Vex, but the woman who stepped onto the alien deck plating was a vision stripped of rank and protocol. Her armor was a testament to a complete and terrifying shift in doctrine. Gone were the standard issue plates designed for balanced protection and mobility. In their place was a custom-built horror of focused, brutal function. Reinforced servos bulged at the joints, amplifying her every movement to bone-shattering force. Her pauldrons were not for deflecting blows but for mounting compact, rotary micro-missile pods, their payloads already cycling live. The gauntlets on her arms terminated not in hands but in integrated plasma casters, their barrels glowing with a hungry, incandescent light. This was not the armor of a soldier who expected to survive a prolonged engagement. It was the armor of a force of nature designed to deliver a maximum amount of violence in a minimum amount of time. She didn't pause to assess the numbers. She didn't issue commands to the Marines fanning out behind her. She simply took one step forward, then another, her pace accelerating from a walk into a run, and then into a full, unstoppable sprint directly into the heart of the swarming enemy. As she moved, a Xylos warrior lunged at her, its scythe-like arm sweeping down to cleave her in two. She didn't block it. She simply moved through the attack, her own enhanced fist moving faster than the eye could track. It connected with the warrior's thorax, not with a punch, but with an explosive discharge of concussive energy that vaporized the creature into a cloud of chitinous fragments and viscous fluid. Another came from her left, and the micro-missile pod on her shoulder twitched, spitting a single projectile that pierced its head and detonated from within. A Marine beside her, fighting with disciplined, controlled bursts of fire, shouted over the din, his voice a mix of awe and terror. "Commander, your flank." "Your defensive systems are..." Kaelen didn't even turn. Her voice cut through the chaos, calm, clear, and absolute, a stark contrast to the carnage she was unleashing with every step. "A soldier fights for duty," she stated, her plasma casters unleashing twin streams of fire that melted a path through a cluster of warriors, their screams cut short. "Their purpose is defined by a command structure. Their resolve is measured in acceptable losses and tactical victories." She moved again, a whirlwind of calculated destruction, her every motion efficient and utterly final. "A mother," she continued, her voice dropping into something lower, more primal, yet carrying to every human fighter in the bay, "fights for forever." The truth of those words settled over them like a physical law. She wasn't fighting to win a battle or secure a position. She was fighting for a future that existed in a single child's smile. Her resolve wasn't measured in objectives taken, it was infinite. Her acceptable loss was zero. Her tactics were simply the most direct line between herself and her son. Every enemy that fell was not an opponent defeated, it was an obstacle erased from that line. The Marines, hardened veterans all, found a new rhythm to their own fighting, matching her terrifying, focused fury. They weren't following a commander into a war zone anymore. They were bearing witness to a reckoning, and they were the instruments of its delivery. The path she carved through the chitinous guards wasn't just a physical one. It was a scar burned into the very concept of the hive itself, a warning of the price of awakening something that should have been left to sleep. The passage Kaelen and her Marines had carved through the hive finally ended at a sealed organic aperture, its edges weeping a faint amber fluid. With a single blast from her plasma caster, the membrane-like door vaporized, filling the corridor with the scent of ozone and something sickly sweet. They stormed into the chamber, weapons raised, scanning for threats, for hostages, for her boy. But the room was vast and hollow, its pulsating walls throbbing with a slow, rhythmic beat that echoed the emptiness they found. The stasis fields that lined the chamber were dark and inert, their energy grids cold. The nursery was deserted. In the center of the silence, a small sound broke the stillness. A whimper, huddled against a curved, veined wall, was a single, small figure. A human girl, no more than 6 or 7, her face streaked with grime and tears, her arms wrapped tightly around her knees. She flinched as the armored giants entered, her eyes wide with a fear that spoke of recent, unimaginable horrors. Kaelen was at her side in an instant, her terrifying war armor kneeling with a surprising gentleness. She retracted her gauntlet, revealing a human hand, and reached out, her voice softer than it had been in hours. "It's all right, we're here to take you home." "Where are the others? Where is my son?" The little girl flinched again, not from Kaelen but from the memory. Her lower lip trembled and fresh tears welled in her eyes. She pointed a shaking finger toward a darker, larger passageway at the far end of the chamber, one that seemed to delve even deeper into the hive's core. Her voice was a tiny, broken thread of sound. They took them, they took everyone, they said. They said the nursery was just for sorting." She swallowed a sob, her small body shuddering. "They took the others deeper, to the heart for the conversion." The word hung in the thick, organic air, conversion. It wasn't a term of war, it wasn't interrogation or imprisonment. It was something far more insidious, a chillingly clinical word that spoke of erasure, of rewriting a person's very essence. The Marines behind Kaelen exchanged grim looks, their grips tightening on their weapons. They all understood the unspoken horror in that term. Kaelen did not move. For a long moment she remained perfectly still, crouched before the child. The gentle concern on her face did not vanish, it was simply subsumed. It was covered over by something else, something that had been waiting in the depths of her soul, patient and cold and absolute. The last vestiges of the soldier, the commander who calculated odds and assessed risk, finally melted away. What rose in its place was a resolve so pure, so focused, it was terrifying to behold. Her eyes, which had held a storm of emotion, now hardened into something glacial and infinitely deep. They were the eyes of something primordial, a force that had existed long before starships and plasma casters, a force that understood there were no negotiations, no retreats, and no compromises when faced with a threat of this nature. She stood, the servos in her armor whining softly. She looked from the terrified little girl to the dark passage that led to the heart of the hive, and then back to her marine. Her voice, when it came, was flat, devoid of all heat, yet it carried a weight that pressed down on them all. It was the sound of a door closing forever on any other possible outcome. "Get her to the ship," she said, her words precise and final. "See that she is safe." She turned to face the dark passage, the micro-missile pods on her shoulders cycling with a series of sharp, deadly clicks. "The rest of you with me, we are going to the heart." She took a step forward and then another, her movements no longer those of a person running, but of a natural disaster walking toward its epicenter. The conversion would not happen. There would be nothing left of the hive's heart to convert anyone. The passage leading to the heart of the hive was unlike any corridor they had fought through before. The pulsing, organic walls transitioned from a defensive chitin to a softer, almost neural tissue, veined with faintly glowing filaments that pulsed in a steady, rhythmic unison. The air itself hummed, thick with a psychic static that raised the hairs on the back of every marine's neck. It felt less like walking through a ship and more like advancing into the center of a living, thinking brain. Sergeant Rourke, his tactical scanner whirring softly, pushed ahead of the commander, his every instinct screaming that this was the core of their enemy's power. He reached another arched opening, this one sealed by a transparent membrane that shimmered with internal light. He peered through, and what he saw made the blood freeze in his veins. Beyond the membrane was a vast chamber, its center dominated by a complex crystalline structure that throbbed with a sickly green energy. Arrayed around it in a perfect circle were the children, each encased in a pod of glowing energy, their faces peaceful, asleep. But it was what connected them that stole Rourke's breath. Fine, almost ethereal threads of light extended from the central crystal, attaching to the temples of each child. The threads pulsed in time with the hive's rhythm, and on a massive organic viewscreen that dominated one wall, data streams flickered. Not Xylos symbols, but human neural patterns, emotional responses, memory signatures. They weren't being consumed, they were being downloaded, assimilated. Rourke stumbled back, his face ashen, turning to Kaelen. His voice was a horrified whisper, all military discipline gone in the face of this grotesque revelation. "Commander, they're not food, they're not hostages." He gestured weakly toward the nightmare scene. The hive mind, it's a perfect collective, but it's static. It can't innovate, it can't create, it can only execute. They've hit an evolutionary dead end. They're trying to use the children, they're trying to absorb them. They want our resilience, they want our creativity. They're trying to graft the human spirit onto their swarm to make themselves unstoppable. Kaelen Vex stepped forward, her armored form filling the archway. She looked through the membrane, her gaze falling on the peaceful face of her son, a tiny thread of alien light attached to his forehead. The sight did not break her. It did not cause her to scream or weep. Instead, a sound began deep in her chest, a low, guttural vibration that was more animal than human. It was the sound of a predator whose cub has been threatened in the most fundamental way possible. Her head turned slowly, her eyes locking not on the chamber, but on the complex control console beside the archway, a node of pulsing crystals and organic interfaces that clearly regulated the entire horrific process. Her voice, when it came, was not a shout. It was a snarl, a promise of violence so personal and so absolute that the Marines behind her took an involuntary step back. "They want to make my son a weapon." The words were dripping with a contempt so pure it could have etched steel. "They want to use his mind, his soul, to fuel their empty swarm." She took a single step toward the console, her plasma casters powering down, her missile pods going still. She didn't need them for this. This required something more direct. More personal. Then they will learn, she hissed, her gauntleted fists curling, the servos whining with pent-up force. What a true weapon looks like. And with a roar that was part fury and part grief, she brought her armored fists down upon the control console. She didn't punch it, she obliterated it. Crystal shattered, organic circuitry pulped under the force of the impact, energy flared and died in a shower of sparks. The entire hive seemed to shudder, the rhythmic pulse stuttering into chaotic, discordant waves as the system controlling the assimilation was utterly and completely destroyed. The destruction of the assimilation console was not the end of the hive's defense. It was the trigger for its most desperate and vile protocol. A deep, guttural alarm klaxon, organic and wet sounding, shuddered through the corridors, and the walls themselves seemed to convulse. From countless microscopic pores in the fleshy ceiling and floor, a fine, iridescent mist began to spray, coalescing into a thick, choking fog that smelled of ozone and rotting honey. It was beautiful and utterly lethal. The first Marine to inhale it deeply, a veteran named Cora, didn't even have time to scream. Her body locked up, her armor clattering against the deck as violent seizures racked her frame, her eyes rolling back into her head as alien neurotoxins hijacked her nervous system. Panic, the true enemy of any soldier, began to bloom in the tight formation. "Seal your helmets, it's a neural agent," Sergeant Rourke barked, his own visor snapping shut just in time as the mist swirled around them, seeking any crack, any weakness. But the order came too late for two others who had taken a breath. They dropped beside Cora, their bodies twitching uncontrollably. The path ahead was now a gauntlet of this shimmering, deadly fog. A corridor designed not to be fought through, but to be avoided, a perfect barrier protecting the hive's heart. Commander Kaelen Vex did not retreat. She didn't even order a fallback. As the mist enveloped her, she simply stood there, her own helmet still retracted, her face exposed to the bioweapon. The Marines watched in horror, expecting her to collapse, but she didn't flinch. Her eyes, cold and calculating, scanned the composition of the mist as it settled on her skin, noting its color, its consistency. She raised a gauntleted hand, watching the droplets bead on the metal. "It's a variant of Neuro Agent 7-Alpha," she stated, her voice clinically calm, a bizarre contrast to the dying gasps of her soldiers. Xylos' standard issue for corridor denial, fast-acting, targets the motor cortex. Rourke stared at her, his voice muffled by his helmet. "How in the stars could you possibly know that?" "Our intel never. I read their manuals," Kaelen interrupted, her tone flat, devoid of pride, simply stating a fact as mundane as the weather. "When I put my boy to sleep." Every night, she finally engaged her helmet, the seal hissing shut, but her work had already begun. Her armored fingers danced across a secondary interface on her wrist console, not for weapons, but for a compact, integrated chemical synthesizer unit, a piece of equipment usually reserved for field medics analyzing unknown toxins. Their science division publishes them. They're arrogant. They think no other species is logical enough to understand their perfection. As she spoke, she ejected a spent energy cell from her plasma caster, catching it deftly in her other hand. With a sharp twist, she popped the casing open, revealing not power conduits, but a series of empty reagent chambers and micromixers. The Marines could only watch, covering their fallen comrades, as their commander used the hollowed-out power cell as an impromptu beaker. She directed the nozzles of her wrist synthesizer into it, a stream of clear liquid and a powdered agent shooting into the chamber. The mixture within began to fizz and smoke, turning a vibrant, healthy blue. They see biology as engineering, a system of levers and pulleys. Every toxin has a counterlever, a key. She finished the mixture with a final compound, and the liquid solidified into a gel. This one's key is a simple alkaline compound bonded with a catalytic enzyme. It doesn't neutralize the toxin, it unravels it, turns it into harmless carbon and water vapor. She slammed the modified cell back into its housing on her forearm. Instead of powering a weapon, the cell now fed into a broad-spectrum emitter array built into her armor's shoulder plate. With a low hum, the emitter came to life, projecting a wide cone of shimmering, blue-tinged energy ahead of her. Where the beam touched the iridescent mist, a miraculous transformation occurred. The deadly fog didn't just dissipate, it unwove itself, breaking apart into a harmless, clean-smelling shower of microscopic water droplets that pattered softly against the organic floor. She was not just creating a safe path, she was actively dismantling the bioweapon molecule by molecule. She took a step forward, the blue beam slicing through the poison like a torch through darkness. "I know their weaknesses better than they do," she said, her voice quiet through the helmet's comms, the statement carrying the weight of 1,000 lonely nights spent studying, preparing for a nightmare she prayed would never come. "Because they see my son as a resource, a component. I see him as my child, and a mother does not need to conquer a galaxy. She just needs to know how to walk through its hell to bring him home." She moved forward, the path clearing before her, a lone, unstoppable figure rendering the hive's most insidious defense utterly useless. The greatest military minds of the Xylos had designed that toxin. A human mother, armed with a bedtime ritual and a bottomless love, had just turned it into nothing more than inconvenient fog. The final archway was not a door but a living valve, a sphincter of wet, glistening tissue that pulsed with the hive's frantic, dying rhythm. It earized open, not to a battlefield but to a throne room. The chamber was vast, the air humming with a tangible psychic weight that pressed down on their senses. The walls were not simple organic matter here. They were a living network of glowing neurons and pulsating light, a physical manifestation of the hive mind itself. And at its center, seated upon a throne of woven bone and crystalline circuitry, was the Xylos queen. She was larger up close, a being of terrifying elegance and absolute authority. Her multifaceted eyes captured the dim light, reflecting the scene before her 1,000 times over, and that scene was the source of the humming energy. Arrayed before her throne, encased in soft, glowing amber energy, were the children. They floated peacefully, their faces serene, but fine, spider silk threads of green light connected their temples to the neural network of the walls, feeding their unique human essence, their creativity, their resilience, their very souls, directly into the stagnant collective of the swarm. Kaelen's gaze swept the room, a predator scanning the herd, and found him instantly, her son. He floated just before the queen, connected by thicker, more complex filaments. The data stream above his pod was not just neural patterns, it was a perfect, real-time replication of his consciousness, a brilliant, unique flame being slowly and meticulously copied into the hive's cold, empty archives. The queen's head tilted, a gesture of cold curiosity. Her voice, when it came, was not a sound in the air but a vibration that resonated directly in their minds, her translation implants rendering it into flawless, icy galactic common. "So the anomaly arrives. We observed your progress, a fascinating, if brutish, display of inefficient force." Her gaze settled on Kaelen, and in those 1,000 reflections, the commander saw not hatred, but the analytical dispassion of a scientist observing a failed experiment. "You have fought your way through my perfect swarm to reclaim this." She gestured with one elegant, razor-sharp limb toward the boy. "You are too late, human." The process is complete. His mind, his spirit, his precious humanity. It is no longer his alone. It is ours. He belongs to the swarm now. He is a part of us. A valuable upgrade. The Marines tensed, their weapons rising, their fingers itching on triggers. This was it, the final stand. They expected a roar of defiance, a scream of denial from their commander. They expected her to break. Kaelen Vex did not break. She did not even seem to hear the taunt. Her helmet retracted with a soft hiss, not in surrender, but to let the queen see her face. To see the absolute, unshakable certainty there were no tears, no rage-twisted features. There was only a calm so profound it was more terrifying than any battle cry. She took a single step forward, her armored boots silent on the organic deck. "You misunderstand," she said, her voice quiet, yet it cut through the psychic hum like a scalpel. It wasn't a shout, it was a correction, a statement of immutable fact. "You didn't take him, you didn't win him." Her eyes never left her son's peaceful face. "You borrowed him." The Queen's antennae twitched, a flicker of confusion in her otherwise perfect composure. The concept was alien, illogical. "And I," Kaelen continued, her voice dropping into something lower, something that resonated with the primal truth of 1,000,000,000 years of evolution, "am here to collect." The Queen began to rise, her form unfolding to its full, imposing height, a threat display meant to cow a lesser species. She never got the chance to finish it. Kaelen's arms came up, not in a gesture of attack, but of pure, unadulterated reclamation. Her integrated plasma casters, charged to levels that strained their housings, did not fire a sustained beam. They unleashed a single, concentrated burst of incandescent white-hot energy, not at the Queen, not at the walls, but at the precise, microscopic nexus of the filaments connecting her son to the hive. The shot was impossible. It was a surgical strike performed with a sledgehammer, a feat of targeting that defied all known physics, guided by something that had nothing to do with computers and everything to do with a mother's perfect, unwavering knowledge of her child. The energy struck true. The filaments didn't just break, they vaporized. The data stream above her son's head shattered into 1,000,000 fragments of dying light. The hive mind, caught in the act of its greatest theft, screamed in a chorus of 1,000,000,000 voices as the precious, stolen data corrupted and vanished. And in the heart of the throne room, a little boy's eyes fluttered open. A storm of chitin and energy erupted in the throne room. The moment Kaelen's son opened his eyes, the Queen shrieked, a piercing psychic wave of pure fury that sent the neural walls pulsing with crimson light. The Marines didn't need an order. They were already moving, their training kicking in as Xylos guardians, their loyalty to the Queen absolute poured from hidden passages in the walls. But the person directing the defense was no longer their military commander. Kaelen's voice cut through the chaos, but it was a different kind of command. It wasn't the measured, strategic tone of a starship captain assessing a battlefield. It was sharper, more instinctual, a frequency tuned not to winning a fight but to protecting a nest. She fired a controlled burst from her plasma caster, melting a warrior that lunged for a floating child pod, her aim flawless even as she never took her eyes off her son. "Rourke, left flank, they're trying to encircle the pods," she called out, her voice carrying a terrifying clarity. The sergeant, already engaging targets to his left, realized she wasn't just giving him a direction. She was seeing the entire room not as a tactical map, but as a perimeter around her young. Her awareness was panoramic, a hyper-vigilance that missed nothing. "Jenna, cover the children, suppressing fire on that conduit now, nobody touches them." The order wasn't a request, it was an absolute law of the universe she was dictating into existence. The Marine, Jenna, didn't just hear a command, she felt the raw, primal force behind it. She laid down a withering hail of fire on the organic conduit, spitting out more warriors, not to secure a position, but to create a literal wall of lead and energy between the enemy and the dormant children. Kaelen herself became a whirlwind of controlled, horrific violence. She wasn't fighting to kill, she was clearing a path. Every movement was efficient, every blast of her weapons, every concussive blow from her enhanced fists served one purpose: to reduce the distance between her and her child. She moved through the Xylos warriors not like a soldier dueling an opponent, but like a force of nature erasing obstacles. A guardian tried to intercept her, and she didn't sidestep. She moved through it, her armored shoulders smashing into its thorax with a wet crack, not even breaking her stride toward the central pod. The Marines fought with a newfound ferocity, but it was a ferocity borrowed from her. They were no longer just soldiers following orders. They were protectors, their own instincts awakened by the sheer, undiluted focus of her maternal fury. They saw the love in her violence, the terrifying purpose in her every action, and it was more motivating than any patriotic speech or promise of promotion. They were defending something sacred, something that made the cold logic of the hive seem hollow and pathetic. They were fighting for a mother to get her son back, and in that moment, it was the only cause in the galaxy that truly mattered. The Queen's perfect swarm, for all its numbers and coordination, was utterly unprepared for an enemy whose primary weapon was a love so fierce it had become an unstoppable force. The word was a fragile thread of sound, almost lost in the psychic hum of the chamber and the roar of plasma fire. It didn't come from the child floating peacefully in the amber energy. It came from the boy who was fighting his way back to himself. Mom. Liam's voice was thin, reedy, laced with a confusion that was uniquely, heartbreakingly human. His eyes were open now, but they weren't seeing the throne room or the Queen. They were seeing the nightmare inside his own mind. His small hand twitched, pressing against the inner surface of the pod. There in my head, I can hear them, all of them. Every Marine on the perimeter heard it. Every one of them felt the singular, seismic shift in the atmosphere. The Queen, sensing the rupture in her perfect acquisition, let out a shriek of pure, outraged logic. But all of that noise, all of that fury, became background static. For Commander Kaelen Vex, the universe had just collapsed into a single point. Her son was awake, and he was afraid. She was at the pod in 2 strides, her armored form a bastion between him and the horrors of the hive. The terrifying war machine, the bringer of annihilation, simply vanished. What remained was a mother. Her gauntleted hands, which had just moments before been delivering concussive, bone-shattering blows, came up to the pod's surface. They did not smash it, they rested against it, a gesture of impossible gentleness. Her helmet had retracted earlier, and now her face was bare, turned not toward the enemy, but only toward her child. When she spoke, her voice was a miracle of contradiction. It was the same voice that had just been snarling orders to tear the hive apart, yet it was utterly transformed. It held a warmth that could have thawed a glacier, a softness that could quiet a hurricane. It was a voice woven from every lullaby ever sung in the dark, every promise of monsters can't get you here, every whispered it's okay after a bad dream. It was the sound of home. I'm here, baby. The words were so simple, so foundational. They were the first truth, the only truth that mattered in that moment. Mom's here, her eyes locked with his, a tether thrown across an infinite chasm, pulling him back from the alien chorus in his mind. She held his gaze, her expression one of absolute, unshakable certainty. There was no fear in her face for him to see, no hint of the impossible battle raging around them. There was only love and a promise. And then, with that connection firmly established, with the lifeline thrown, she let him see the other side of that love. The side that made it unbreakable. Her voice didn't rise in volume. It didn't need to. It dropped, taking on a new quality, a low, vibrational certainty that was more felt than heard. It was the sound of a mountain stating its intention to move. And she said, her gaze never leaving his, very, very angry. The declaration was not a threat to him. It was a reassurance. It was her telling him, in the only way that mattered, that the things in his head were already dead. They just didn't know it yet. As the last word left her lips, her hands moved from the gentle resting place on the pod. Her fingers, now instruments of that promised anger, found the base of the thicker, primary neural filaments still attached to his temples. The filaments that were pumping the hive's collective consciousness into his mind. She didn't look for a release mechanism. She didn't search for a safe disengagement protocol. There was no time for the careful, scientific approach the Xylos would have used. With a sound that was part sob and part snarl, she wrapped her enhanced fingers around the glowing cords. There was a sizzle of burning energy, a psychic feedback shriek that echoed through the chamber, and with one brutal, precise motion, she tore them from his skull. It wasn't a gentle extraction, it was an amputation, it was a severing. The connection didn't just break, it was annihilated. Liam gasped a full, deep breath of free air, his small body slumping forward inside the pod as the last vestiges of the alien presence were violently, completely, and permanently erased. The things in his head were gone because his mother had reached into his nightmare and physically ripped them out. The Queen's shriek was not a sound of pain, but of ultimate, incandescent fury. The perfect theft had been ruined, the priceless data corrupted by the very source it was stolen from. The psychic command she issued was not a thought but a pure impulse of rage, and the walls of her throne room seemed to birth her response. From hidden, wet apertures in the neural architecture, her personal guard emerged. These were not the standard chitinous warriors of the swarm. They were larger, their carapaces a darker, polished obsidian, and they moved with a chilling, silent synchronicity that spoke of a single, horrifyingly focused mind. Their limbs were not simple claws, they were adaptive weaponry, shifting and reconfiguring in real time serrated edges for slicing through armor, blunt, piston-like protrusions for crushing, and needle-tipped appendages dripping with a neurotox and specifically keyed to human physiology. They were the Queen's masterpiece, her answer to human ingenuity, designed in the deepest biolabs of the hive to analyze, adapt to, and dismantle any human tactical pattern they encountered. They moved as one, a wall of living, evolving weaponry, and they did not charge. They advanced, a perfectly coordinated, unstoppable tide. The Marines' initial volleys of plasma fire, which would have vaporized a standard warrior, were met with a disconcerting response. The lead guard's carapaces did not break. They shimmered, absorbing the energy and dissipating it as harmless heat, their adaptive biology already hardening against the specific frequency of the attack. They were learning and they were closing the distance. Kaelen Vex did not hesitate. She did not even seem to process the new threat as a military problem to be solved. Her son was free of the pod, clutched safely in her arms, his face buried in her neck armor. Her assessment was instantaneous and absolute. The mission parameters had shifted one final, decisive time. Rourke, her voice cut through the din, not with panic, but with a clarity that brooked no argument. Fall back to the ship with the children, all of them. Now, the sergeant, laying down covering fire that was becoming less effective by the second, stared at her in disbelief. "Commander, we are not leaving you." "We can, that is an order." The voice that came from her was not that of a superior officer. It was the voice of a law of physics. It was undeniable. "Get them to the Maternal Fury, get them clear." She was already moving, not away from the advancing guard, but parallel to them, drawing their attention, creating a diversion. One of the younger Marines, her voice cracking with adrenaline and loyalty, shouted over the comms, "We can hold them together, Commander, we can make a stand." Kaelen turned her head, and for a split second her gaze met the Marines. In that look, there was no shared sentiment of camaraderie in a last stand. There was only a fundamental, unbridgeable difference in purpose. A soldier's duty, she stated, her voice somehow both gentle and utterly ironclad, is to complete the mission. The mission is the children's safety. Your duty is to see it through. She shifted her son's weight in one arm, the other bringing her plasma caster to bear on the guard's flank, forcing them to divide their attention. A mother's duty, she continued, and this time her voice softened only for him, for the child in her arms, is to ensure her child escapes, even if it means standing still. With that, she did the one thing no soldier in that room would ever have considered. She stopped retreating. She planted her feet firmly on the organic deck, between the advancing wall of perfect, adaptive killers and the retreating path of a child and his friends. She was not making a stand, she was becoming a wall. She gently set Liam down, pushing him toward Sergeant Rourke. Go with the sergeant, baby. Mom will be right behind you." The lie was the most loving thing she had ever said. Rourke, his heart hammering against his ribs, understood. This was not a tactical withdrawal. This was a sacrifice. But he also understood the terrifying truth in her words. Their duty was to the mission. Her duty was to her son. And in this moment, those two purposes were perfectly, tragically aligned. He grabbed Liam's hand, his own voice gruff with an emotion he couldn't name. "You heard her. Full retreat, covering fire on my mark. Go, go, go." The Marines, their training overriding their horror, began to fall back, laying down a desperate hail of fire as they hustled the dazed children toward the broken passage they had carved. Kaelen Vex stood alone, the Queen's Guard, their multifaceted eyes ignoring the retreating group, focused entirely on the lone anomaly that had broken their perfect system. They recognized the greater threat. They surged toward her, a wave of shifting, deadly anatomy, and Kaelen Vex, a mother who had just ensured her child's escape, finally allowed herself to smile. It was a cold, terrible thing. She powered her systems to levels the engineers who designed them would have called suicidal. "You wanted to study human spirit." She whispered to the oncoming tide, her voice lost in the roar of her own overloading weapons. "Let me give you a private lesson." And she met their charge not with a soldier's tactics, but with a mother's fury, finally, utterly, completely, and gloriously unrestrained. Alone against the tide of shifting, adaptive weaponry, Kaelen Vex did not see an insurmountable opponent. She saw a system. The Queen's personal guard advanced with a terrifying, unified purpose, their forms reconfiguring to counter her plasma blasts, their obsidian carapaces shedding the energy with an eerie, heat-shimmering efficiency. They were the pinnacle of Xylos bioengineering, a perfect, logical counter to a human soldier, but the entity they faced had long since abandoned that title. A soldier fights within a system, a mother rewrites it. Her enhanced optics, linked directly to the Maternal Fury's deep spectrum scans taken during their brutal entry, painted a new layer of reality over the throne room. She wasn't just seeing walls of chitin and neural tissue. She was seeing the hive's underlying architecture. Glowing, pulsing conduits of lymphatic fluid became potential chemical delivery systems. Throbbing sacs of pressurized gas near the ceiling were unmasked as organic pressure regulators. The very floor they stood on was a network of biomechanical systems designed to keep the hive alive. Systems she could now subvert. As the guard closed in, she didn't retreat. She sidestepped, her armored fist not striking a warrior, but smashing into a soft, pulsing node on the wall beside her. It wasn't an attack, it was an input. The node shattered, spraying viscous fluid, and a deep, grinding shudder ran through the chamber. Across the room, a massive, vein-like pipe running along the ceiling suddenly bulged, then ruptured with a violent hiss. Instead of water or nutrients, it vomited a torrent of thick, acrid, green-tinged fluid. The hive's own industrial waste coolant, highly corrosive to organic matter. The wave of caustic fluid cascaded over the left flank of the advancing guard. Their perfect adaptive carapaces, designed to dissipate energy weapons, were utterly unprepared for a chemical deluge. The polished obsidian surface instantly began to smoke and pit, the acidic fluid eating through their biological armor with horrifying speed. The synchronicity of their advance broke as several of them stumbled, their forms writhing as the corrosive substance found seams and joints, their silent coordination replaced by the first, faint clicks of distress. The Queen's shriek of outrage was a physical force in the room, but Kaelen was already moving, a ghost in the machine of her enemy's body. Her voice, amplified by her helmet's external speaker, cut through the chaos flat and absolute. "You built a labyrinth," she stated, her words not a question but a verdict. "I'll make it your tomb." Her next move was a masterpiece of brutal simplicity. She targeted a cluster of glowing, crystal-like growths that her scans identified as the primary neural relays for this sector of the hive. A sustained burst from her plasma caster melted them into slag. The effect was instantaneous and catastrophic. The chamber's environmental systems, suddenly severed from the hive mind's controlling intelligence, defaulted to their most basic emergency protocols. Blast doors of woven bone and muscle, designed to seal off breached sections, slammed down at random, cutting the guards' numbers in half and trapping several in isolated pockets. The lighting flickered erratically, and then the most terrifying protocol of all engaged. With a deafening roar of tearing flesh and shattering resin, the far wall of the throne room simply blew outward into the vacuum of space. The decompression was monstrous. Everything not bolted down, including a dozen of the remaining guards, was instantly ripped out into the silent, airless void, their flailing forms vanishing into the star-dotted blackness. The queen, anchored to her throne by roots of crystalline circuitry, remained, but her psychic scream was now one of pure, undiluted horror. She was watching her own perfect biology turned against her, her own home becoming an instrument of her annihilation. Kaelen Vex, anchored by magnetic locks in her boots, stood unwavering in the howling maelstrom of escaping atmosphere, a solitary, immovable monument to a wrath that no amount of logical adaptation could ever hope to counter. The storm she had unleashed was not of her making, it was theirs, and she was merely its conductor. The path back was a gauntlet through the dying convulsions of a living world. The hive, grievously wounded by her systematic dismantling, was hemorrhaging atmosphere and shuddering with violent neurological spasms. Conduits of glowing fluid erupted from the walls, spraying the corridors with acidic mist, while sections of the ceiling collapsed in showers of brittle chitin and wet organic matter. This was no longer a strategic retreat. It was a race through the crumbling heart of a mortally wounded beast, and cradled in her arms, Kaelen's son was her only compass, her only reason to navigate the chaos. Her enhanced sensors, still synced to the Maternal Fury's deep scans, mapped a route not of escape but of finality. She wasn't heading for the nearest exit. She was diving deeper toward the thrumming, oppressive heat that could only be one thing: the hive's core reactor. It was the source of the entire cluster's power, a massive, pulsing heart of unstable bioplasma. The Marines and the children were already on their way to the ship, their path cleared by her earlier rampage. Her duty to them was complete, but her promise to the Xylos, her vow that this would never happen again, was yet to be delivered. She found the reactor chamber at the end of a spiraling, downward passage that grew hotter with every step. The air shimmered with waste heat, and the thrumming was a physical pressure against her armor. The chamber itself was a cathedral of raw power, dominated by a colossal, transparent sack of thickened membrane. Within it, a sun was being born and contained, a swirling, incandescent vortex of green and gold plasma, held in check by a web of throbbing, organic filaments. It was both magnificent and horrifying, the pinnacle of Xylos bioengineering. She set Liam down for a moment, her body shielding him from the intense radiance. "Close your eyes, baby, just for a second." Her voice was calm, a stark contrast to the primal fury of the energy before them. From a compartment on her thigh, she didn't retrieve a standard-issue military explosive. What she produced was a series of compact, crystalline charges, their design sleek and utterly human. They were not meant for maximum destruction, they were designed for precision. For a very specific kind of message, with movements that were swift and sure, she planted the charges at the key structural nexus. Points her scans identified the delicate organic filaments regulating the plasma flow, the pulsating nodes that fed the containment field. This wasn't about brute force, it was about surgical sabotage. As the final charge clicked into place, her armored fingers input the timer, not minutes. Not even 1 minute, a mere handful of seconds, a delay so short it was practically suicidal. She looked at the swirling core, at the masterpiece of a species that believed it could possess and consume the spirit of another. Her voice, when she spoke, was quiet, almost a whisper, but it carried the weight of a galactic verdict. "You thought you could take our future and make it your own. she said to the empty chamber, to the queen who was doubtless watching through some final sensor. "You thought our children were resources to be harvested. This isn't a bomb." She activated the sequence. A soft, relentless beeping began to count down from 20. "It's a message written in your own lifeblood. The message is never again." Scooping Liam back into her arms, she turned and ran. This was no longer a careful advance. It was a desperate, flat-out sprint for survival. The hive seemed to sense its impending doom, the convulsions becoming more violent, the passages twisting and collapsing around her. The beeping of the timer was a ghost in her helmet, a digital heartbeat counting down to oblivion. She wasn't just running from an explosion, she was running ahead of a star's death throes, carrying the only thing that mattered out of the fire. Behind her, the countdown reached its end and the message was delivered. The final stretch to the breached hangar bay was a blur of fire and collapsing alien architecture. Kaelen's world had narrowed to the weight of her son in her arms and the pounding of her own heart, a drumbeat counting down the final seconds she had bought them. She burst through the ragged tear in the hive's hull, the mangled opening where the Maternal Fury was still embedded like a dagger in a wound, and the scene that greeted her was both a profound relief and a spike of pure fury. The ship's engines weren't at full power, preparing for a desperate jump. They were idling. The bay doors were still open. They were waiting. She stumbled across the debris-littered deck, her armor scorched and dripping with dark, viscous ichor, one leg dragging slightly from a blow that had nearly crippled her servos. Sergeant Rourke was there, ushering the last of the rescued children into a waiting transport sled, his own armor battered. He looked up as she entered, and the relief on his face was instantly wiped away by the look on hers. She didn't see a crew that had successfully held the extraction point. She saw a crew that had disobeyed a direct, final order. Her voice, when it came, was a raw, strained thing, stripped of any warmth by exhaustion and a rage that hadn't yet cooled. It was the voice of a commander who had just walked through hell and found her own people risking everything she had just sacrificed for. "Rourke," she barked, the name a whip crack across the bay. "Why are you still here? The core is minutes from a cascade. Go, get this ship out of here now." The order was absolute, a command fueled by the terrifying knowledge of what was coming. But before Rourke could form a reply, before anyone could move, a small figure detached itself from the huddle of children by the transport sled. He was still pale, still shaking slightly from the ordeal, but his eyes were clear and fixed only on her. Liam broke into a run, his small legs carrying him across the bay, bypassing the stunned Marines, and he threw his arms around her bloodied and battered leg plate, burying his face against the cold, scarred metal. The impact was slight, but it was enough to stop her completely. The rigid line of her shoulders, held so tight for so long, seemed to fracture. The storm in her eyes, that terrifying focus that had dismantled a hive, broke apart. She looked down, her helmet retracting with a soft hiss, and for a single, breathtaking second, the warrior was gone. In her place was just a woman, her face etched with exhaustion and smeared with grime, looking at her son. Her hand, which had moments before been configured for lethal force, came up and rested gently on his back, the gesture impossibly tender. Her voice, when she spoke again, was different. The strident command was gone, replaced by a low, weary whisper meant for his ears alone. It was the voice from his bedroom doorway after a nightmare, the voice that promised the monsters weren't real. "It's okay," she murmured, her thumb stroking his shoulder. "I told you I'd come back." In that simple statement lay the entirety of her promise, the sum of every lullaby and every scraped knee kissed better. It was an oath that had carried her through fire and would do so again 1,000 times over. The mission was complete. Her child was safe in her arms. And for that one fleeting moment, nothing else in all the galaxy mattered. Outside the viewports, the Xylos hive cluster did not simply explode. It came apart in a silent, breathtaking cataclysm of light and energy, a final, brilliant star flare against the black velvet of space. The intricate, spiraling architecture of chitin and biocircuitry, a civilization that had spanned star systems, vanished in an expanding sphere of incandescent white fire. There was no sound, only the deep, groaning shudder that ran through the Maternal Fury's frame as the shockwave of the blast washed over its scarred hull. The light of the detonation faded as quickly as it had bloomed, leaving behind nothing but an expanding cloud of fine, glittering dust and the cold, indifferent stars. It was over. The threat was not just defeated, it was completely, utterly, and permanently erased from existence. On the bridge, bathed in the soft, returning glow of control panels and star-filled screens, a profound and weary silence settled. The crew, their faces etched with the grime of battle and the hollowed-out look of those who have stared into an abyss, moved slowly, performing the quiet, methodical tasks of securing from battle stations. The frantic red of alert lights was gone, replaced by the steady, calming blue of normal operations. They had done it. They had accomplished the impossible. Yet there were no cheers, no triumphant shouts. The victory felt too immense, too costly, and too deeply personal for celebration. It was a silence of shared exhaustion, of trauma endured, and of a bond forged in the fires of a mother's wrath. In the center of it all, Commander Kaelen Vex stood, her battle-scarred armor seeming to weigh 1,000 tons. She had not moved from her spot, her arms still wrapped tightly around the small, trembling form of her son. Liam, his face buried in the cool, hard plating of her chest, finally lifted his head. The bridge lights reflected in his wide, questioning eyes as he looked from the peaceful starfield on the main view screen back to his mother's weary, resolute face. The universe outside was calm, the terrifying monsters of his recent nightmare now just atoms scattered on the solar winds. His voice, when it came, was a small, fragile thing in the vast quiet of the bridge. "Mom," he whispered, "are we safe now?" Kaelen looked down at him, and the last vestiges of the unbreakable warrior, the force of nature that had torn a hive apart, simply melted away. What remained was just a mother. Her hand, which had moments before been configured for lethal force, came up to gently brush a stray lock of hair from his forehead. Her voice, when she answered, was low and steady, a bedrock of certainty in his newly uncertain world. It held no trace of the fury that had shaken the stars, only an infinite, unshakable promise. "As long as I breathe," she said, her words not a boast but a simple, immutable fact of the universe, like gravity or the speed of light. "You are safe." But the promise did not end there. It hung in the air, and those on the bridge who heard it understood its full, terrifying depth. It was a vow that extended far beyond this moment, beyond this ship, beyond this single, obliterated enemy. It was a declaration made to the entire, unknowable cosmos. It was a warning etched into the void itself, a line drawn in the sand of reality for any species, any empire, any power that might ever look upon a human child and see a resource, a tool, or a weakness. The quiet tone held the echo of the fury that had just cleansed a sector of space. It was her telling the galaxy that she had done this once, and she would not hesitate to do it again on any scale necessary. Her love was not a vulnerability to be exploited. It was the most powerful and destructive force in existence, and she had just provided a definitive, horrifying demonstration of its absolute and final retribution. The return to the sterile, brightly lit corridors of High Command felt like stepping onto an alien world. The air here didn't hum with psychic energy or smell of ozone and burnt chitin. It smelled of recycled air and polished metal. The silence wasn't the deep, weary quiet of a bridge crew who had witnessed a reckoning, but the hushed, bureaucratic silence of an institution struggling to process an impossibility. Commander Kaelen Vex walked those halls, her son's hand firmly in hers, and the stares that followed them weren't of awe, but of a profound, unsettled confusion. She had not just returned from a mission, she had brought a singularity of chaos back into their ordered universe. The debriefing chamber was a stark, circular room, its walls lined with the holographic emblems of 100 member worlds. Seated around a gleaming table were the most senior admirals and generals of the unified human fleet, their faces a mosaic of stern discipline and poorly concealed disbelief. The data streams hovering above the table's center displayed the final, catastrophic moments of the Xylos hive cluster, the silent, brilliant flash of light, the expanding cloud of dust. It played on a loop, a silent testament to an act that defied all their doctrines of engagement, rules of war, and concepts of acceptable force. An older general, his uniform a tapestry of service ribbons and his face a roadmap of a lifetime of calculated campaigns, finally broke the tense silence. He leaned forward, his fingertips pressed together, his voice carefully modulated to project authority over his own clear bafflement. "Commander Vex," he began, the title sounding more like an accusation than an acknowledgement of rank. "The tactical analysis of your engagement, it defies comprehension. The sheer amount of ordnance expended, the complete disregard for established withdrawal protocols, the deliberate targeting of life support and power systems. Your actions resulted in the total, unequivocal annihilation of an entire Xylos hive cluster, a strategic objective we have been working toward for decades." He paused, choosing his next words with the extreme care of a man trying to describe a hurricane without admitting he's afraid of the wind. "Your actions were unorthodox, reckless even. You risked your ship, your crew, and a significant strategic asset on what the logs indicate was a purely personal crusade." All eyes in the room turned to Kaelen. She had been standing at ease, her posture perfect, but her gaze was distant, as she was still seeing the ghost of the hive on the back of her eyelids. At the general's words, a slow, cold smile touched her lips. It didn't reach her eyes. Those remained as hard and impenetrable as diamond. She looked from the general to the holographic display of the explosion, then back to the faces of the men and women who governed humanity's military might. "You sent a soldier to do a mother's job," she said, her voice quiet, yet it seemed to absorb all other sound in the room. It wasn't an excuse, it wasn't an apology. It was a simple, devastating correction of their entire worldview. You operate on a ledger of gains and losses. You see children as non-combatants, as assets to be protected, as pieces on a strategic board. The Xylos saw them as components, resources to be consumed. Her cold smile widened by a fraction, a razor-thin crack in a mask of ice. "I saw my son." She let the weight of that statement hang in the air, a truth so fundamental it rendered their massive table and their glowing data streams utterly insignificant. You think in terms of acceptable casualties and tactical victories. You use words like unorthodox and reckless because they are the only words your doctrine provides for a phenomenon you cannot quantify. She took a single, small step forward, and every person at the table instinctively leaned back. The Xylos made a fatal error in their analysis. They believed that by taking our children, they had acquired leverage over our soldiers. They did not understand that they were not negotiating with soldiers anymore. They were dealing with mothers, with fathers, with grandparents. They awakened the oldest, most primal force in human existence. Her eyes scanned the room, and for a moment, it wasn't a decorated commander standing before them, but something far older and far more dangerous. We do not fight for territory or for resources or for political dominance when that force is awakened. We fight for forever. We fight to ensure a specific child gets to see a specific tomorrow. There is no calculus for that. There is no orthodox way to do it. There is only the doing of it by any means necessary. She paused, her gaze finally settling back on the stunned general. The cold smile returned, this time edged with a terrifying finality. "So don't be surprised," she said, her voice dropping to a whisper that was more frightening than any shout. "When the nursery rhymes end in blood, you sent a soldier to do a mother's job, and you are disappointed I did not come back with a soldier's tidy report. I did not bring you a victory, I brought you a guarantee. I brought you the certainty that no species, no empire, no power in this galaxy or any other will ever make that mistake again. The lesson has been written. I suggest you learn from it." With that, she turned, her son's hand still clasped in hers, and walked out of the debriefing chamber, leaving behind a silence more absolute and more terrifying than the void of space itself. The hangar bay of the central starbase was a cavern of noise and light, a stark and almost jarring contrast to the cold, silent terror of the hive. This was a place of reunions, of tears that were not of fear but of a joy so profound it seemed to hurt. The air, once thick with the smell of ozone and alien ichor, was now filled with the sounds of weeping laughter and the frantic, grateful calls of parents who had been living in a nightmare. One by one, the children, still wrapped in thermal blankets from the medical team, were guided toward their families. The scene was a mosaic of human emotion, a tapestry woven from relief, exhaustion, and a love that had refused to be extinguished. And in the center of it all, a quiet figure stood observing. Commander Kaelen Vex, her battle armor still scarred and smeared with the evidence of her rampage, held her son's hand tightly. She was no longer a force of nature, a vessel of galactic retribution. Here, amidst the crying families, she was just a mother, her own heart aching with a shared understanding of the loss these people had narrowly avoided. As each child was passed into the arms of their family, she would step forward and press a small, cool piece of polished metal into their tiny, trembling hands. It was a fragment of her own shoulder plate, the edge smooth so it wouldn't cut, and on its surface, etched with a laser precision that spoke of a solemn, unwavering promise, were two words: never again. The words were not a platitude. They were not a motto or a hopeful sentiment. They were a vow, cold and hard and absolute as the metal itself. They were a piece of the armor that had torn a hive apart, now given to the most vulnerable as a shield for the future. They were a reminder and a warning etched in steel. One father, his face streaked with tears as he clutched his daughter so tightly it seemed he might never let go, looked up at Kaelen, his voice choked with an emotion too vast for words. "Thank you," he managed to sob, the two words carrying the weight of a saved universe. We can never, thank you." Kaelen looked at him, then at the little girl now safely buried in his embrace. The cold fire that had fueled her crusade was gone from her eyes, replaced by a deep, weary empathy. She did not smile. The moment was too solemn for that. Instead, she offered a truth, spoken in a low, steady tone that was both gentle and carried the terrible gravity of a star. "It takes a galaxy to raise a child," she said, her gaze sweeping over the reunited families, the bustling starbase, the very idea of a civilized, interconnected society built to nurture its young. It was an acknowledgement of community, of the shared duty and beautiful complexity of bringing up the next generation in safety and hope. Then her eyes returned to the father, and her voice, though no louder, changed. It took on the faintest echo of the fury that had shaken the cosmos, a whisper of the primal law she had been forced to enact. "It takes one mother to burn it down for them." The statement hung in the air, not as a boast but as a bleak and necessary fact. It was the other side of the coin, the shadow cast by the light of that nurturing galaxy. It acknowledged the beautiful, collaborative effort of peace, while also stating the terrifying, singular price of its defense. The galaxy builds, it protects, it teaches. But when that safety is violated at its most fundamental level, the response is not a committee or a fleet. It is something far older, far more focused, and utterly without mercy. The father didn't nod in agreement. He simply held his daughter tighter, understanding in that moment that the safety he now felt was not a default state of the universe, but a condition purchased with a fury he could scarcely imagine. The galaxy would raise his child, and a mother had just burned a part of it to the ground to ensure that could still happen. The nightmares always began the same way, not with a scream, but with a silence so profound it was more terrifying than any alarm. In the quiet of his quarters aboard the Maternal Fury, Liam would go still in his sleep, his small body tensing as the ghost of the hive mind reached for him across the light years. The psychic echo of a billion chittering voices, the cold, invasive feeling of being a data point in a vast, uncaring system, it would seep into his dreams and his breathing would hitch, his hands clenching the sheets. And she was always there. Commander Kaelen Vex would appear in the doorway, not as a warrior in scarred armor, but as a silhouette softened by the low light of the corridor. She would cross the room and sit on the edge of his bunk, her movements silent and sure. She wouldn't shake him awake. She would simply lay a hand on his back, her touch a steady, grounding weight against the formless terror, and she would begin to sing. Her voice was nothing like the one she used on the bridge. It was low, a little rough with fatigue, but it held a melody so ancient it felt pulled from the very bedrock of Earth itself. The words were simple, a lullaby about a mother rabbit promising her child that nothing in the gentle, sleeping meadow would ever harm them. It spoke of quiet burrows and watching moons, of soft noses and twitching whiskers, a world of profound and simple safety. As she sang, the terrifying chorus in Liam's mind would falter, its cold logic unable to process this illogical, emotional signal. The song was a shield woven from memory and love, and under its protection, the tension would drain from his small frame. His breathing would deepen, his fists would unclench, and he would slip into a dreamless, peaceful sleep, the alien presence utterly banished. One night, Sergeant Rourke, making his rounds, paused outside the open doorway. He watched the scene, the fearsome commander who had torn a hive apart with her bare hands, now hunched over her son's bunk, her voice a soft rumble in the quiet ship. He saw the absolute peace that settled over the boy, and he felt something shift in the very air of the corridor. The constant, low-grade anxiety that hummed through any vessel on deep space patrols seemed to quiet, if only for a moment. The bulkheads felt less like cold metal and more like the walls of a home. Later, on the bridge during the night watch, Rourke stood beside her as she monitored the star charts, her face illuminated by the soft glow of the console. The silence between them was comfortable, forged in the fire of their recent ordeal. After a long moment, he spoke, his voice quieter than usual. "Commander." She turned her head, a silent question in her eyes. He gestured vaguely back toward the crew quarters. "I've seen you face down fleets. I've watched you stare into the heart of a hostile swarm without flinching. I've seen you wield weapons that can crack a planet's crust." He paused, choosing his words with the care of a man describing a miracle. "But that song. What you do for him in there, I've felt it, we all have. It's like the entire ship just breathes out." He met her gaze, his own filled with a newfound, profound respect that had nothing to do with rank or battle honors. "I don't think I'm overstating it when I say that might be the most powerful weapon we have on this entire ship. It wasn't a weapon of destruction, but of preservation." It was the sound of the meadow she sang about, a declaration that there were still places in the vast, cold universe where monsters were not allowed, and that this ship, her ship, was one of them. The silence that followed the Xylos' extinction was a fragile thing, a temporary peace purchased with unimaginable fury. Aboard the Maternal Fury, a new routine took hold, built not on combat drills and tactical alerts, but on the quiet hum of life support systems and the soft, nightly sound of a lullaby. Commander Kaelen Vex had become a fixed point in the universe for her son, a bulwark against the nightmares, and her ship, by extension, had become a sanctuary. The crew, though forever marked by their ordeal, began to believe they might finally know a measure of calm, but the universe, as it always does, had been listening. And in the cold, dark spaces between stars, a new kind of predator had taken note. The Vol were not like the Xylos, where the hive mind sought to consume and assimilate. The Vol culture was built upon a foundation of pure, predatory meritocracy. They were a species of sleek, reptilian hunters, their society a never-ending gladiatorial contest where status was won through the public domination and humiliation of powerful foes. They did not value territory or resources as much as they valued trophies, tangible proof of their superiority over another celebrated warrior. The obliteration of an entire Xylos hive cluster was not a warning to them, it was a beacon. It announced the arrival of a champion unlike any other, a being whose name had begun to echo through their communication networks like a challenge, the human mother. Their message did not arrive on a standard diplomatic frequency. It was a data packet wrapped in a psychic shroud, a broadcast so potent it bypassed all standard communication buffers and slammed directly into the Maternal Fury's main computer core. The bridge lights flickered, and the main view screen dissolved into a scene of startling brutality. It showed a Vol warrior, its scales the color of bruised twilight, standing victorious in a glistening arena. At its feet was not a defeated opponent but a human, a colonist by the looks of his worn gear, his face a mask of defiance and pain. The Vol warrior placed a clawed foot on the man's chest, not to kill him but to display him. Then a voice, smooth as oiled glass and colder than the void, echoed in the chamber, its translation implants rendering its arrogant tones with perfect clarity. "We are the Vol," the voice purred. "We have collected many things from your kind. We have your technology. We have deciphered your tactics." The view shifted, showing other humans in crude cages, their spirits not yet broken, their eyes still burning with a familiar, stubborn fire. "We have even captured your famous resilience. It makes for a most entertaining spectacle." The transmission focused back on the warrior in the arena, who leaned down, its multifaceted eyes staring directly through the screen, as if it could see the commander herself. "But we have heard a new rumor. We have heard of a human mother, a creature of singular wrath. We possess the body of your species. Let us see if you possess its heart. Come and prove it to us." The message ended, leaving the bridge in a silence more profound than any the crew had known since the hive. This was not a declaration of war, it was a taunt. An invitation to a game whose rules were designed for their amusement. Every eye on the bridge turned slowly toward their commander. They expected the storm. They braced for the cold fire, for the immediate, devastating order to plot a course for Vol space. Kaelen Vex did not move. She stood before the now blank view screen, her hands resting on the command rail. Her expression was unreadable, but the crew felt the air change. It did not grow heavy with impending violence. Instead, it grew still as the depths of a grave. She slowly turned to face her communication officer, her movements deliberate, almost calm. When she spoke, her voice was not the roar of a plasma cannon. It was the quiet, precise click of a round being chambered in a darkened room. Open a channel, tight beam, directly to the source of that transmission. Her order was given without a hint of emotion. The officer, his hands trembling only slightly, complied. A light on the console blinked, indicating the channel was live. Kaelen leaned forward, her voice dropping into a register so low it seemed to vibrate through the deck plates. She did not shout, she did not snarl. She spoke 5 words, each one dropping into the silence like a stone into a fathomless well. "You mistake heart for mercy." There was a pause, a single heartbeat of time where the entirety of her immeasurable resolve was focused down that laser-tight beam, a spear of pure intent aimed at the heart of an arrogant species. "You will not survive the era." The channel closed, the silence returned. There was no grand speech, no rallying cry to the crew. She simply turned to her navigator, her eyes holding the same terrifying calm they had held in the dying moments of the hive. "Plot the most direct course to their broadcast coordinates," she said, her tone that of a person stating a simple, unavoidable fact of nature. "Do not hurry. Let them have time to understand what is coming." She finally looked at Sergeant Rourke, and in that glance was a truth that chilled him to his very soul. The fury she had unleashed upon the Xylos had been a wildfire, burning hot and fast to rescue her child. What she would bring to the Vol would be something else entirely, something slow, cold, and meticulously deliberate. They had not asked for a rescue, They had asked for a demonstration, and Kaelen Vex, a mother who had already ensured her child's safety, was now free to give them one they would discuss in terrified whispers for 1,000 generations. The familiar hum of the Maternal Fury's engines was different this time. It was not the aggressive, straining whine that preceded a jump into a war zone, but a lower, steadier resonance, a patient and watchful vibration that seemed to seep into the very bones of the ship. They were no longer a blade searching for a heart to pierce. The ship itself had been transformed in the weeks since their return. The gaping wound in its hull, where it had been embedded in the Xylos hive, was now sealed over with gleaming new armor plating, but the battle scars across its length remained, polished but not erased. They were not marks of shame to be hidden. They were a testament, a warning etched in durasteel for any who might look upon her and see a target. Her weapon systems were fully charged, her shields at maximum strength, but her posture was not one of attack. She hung in the void like a sentinel, a fixed point of silent, immovable protection. On the bridge, the atmosphere had shifted just as profoundly. The crew, once coiled springs of combat-ready tension, now moved with a different kind of purpose. Their actions were measured, deliberate, their focus turned outward in a continuous, vigilant scan. They monitored shipping lanes, tracked distant celestial bodies, analyzed atmospheric readings from the world below, a world called Viridia's Hope, a fledgling agricultural colony nestled in the green and blue sphere turning slowly beneath them. This was not a mission of search and destroy. It was a mission of watch and ward. Commander Kaelen Vex stood before her crew, not on the elevated command platform, but among them. She wore her duty uniform, the armor she had torn the hive apart with stored away, a tool for a purpose she prayed would not be needed again. Her son was safe in his quarters, the nightmares growing quieter with each passing night in the steady, predictable rhythm of their new duty. She looked at the faces of her officers, Rourke at tactical, his grizzled features set in a look of solid determination, the young ensign at navigation, her eyes wide with the weight of her new responsibility. These were not just her subordinates, they were the extended family that had walked through hell and back with her. Her voice, when she spoke, did not ring with the cold, declarative fury that had once shaken the hive. It was quieter, but it carried with it a density, a gravity that was perhaps even more powerful. "We are redeployed," she began, her gaze sweeping across the deck. "But our orders are not written on a data slate from high command. They are written in the silence we left behind us. They are written in the hope of the people on that world below, who look to the stars not with fear, but with the trust that they are not alone." She paused, letting the image of the peaceful colony settle in their minds. The Xylos are gone, the Vol, for now, are silent, but the universe is vast and darkness lingers in the gaps between stars. There will be others who see our resilience not as a reason for peace, but as a challenge to be broken. She took a step closer to the main view screen where Viridia's Hope hung like a jewel. "So we will stand here. The Maternal Fury is no longer just a warship, it is a guardian vessel. Its guns are not for conquest, they are a promise. Its shields are not for its own protection alone, they are a bulwark for every soul on that planet." She turned back to her crew, her expression one of absolute, unshakable conviction. They took from us to make themselves stronger, they saw a weakness to exploit. We will show them they were wrong. We will show them that our greatest strength is not in our ability to destroy, but in our unwavering will to protect. Her voice, though still calm, took on a harder edge, the steel beneath the velvet undeniable. "So understand our new role with perfect clarity. We are not soldiers today. We are shields." Her eyes locked with those of every person on the bridge, and in that moment they all felt it, a shift in identity, a sacred charge. "And we," she said, her final words dropping into the silence like a vow carved into stone, "will let nothing through." The order was given, not to advance but to hold. The massive ship oriented itself, its broadest, most heavily armored flank facing the empty void from which any threat would come. positioning itself squarely between the unknown and the vulnerable world it was sworn to defend. On the surface of Viridia's Hope, a child pointed a telescope toward the new, steady star in their night sky, and a parent smiled, a fear they didn't even know they carried quietly laid to rest. Above them, the shield was in place and it was waiting. The Vol fleet emerged from the shimmering tier in reality, not as a disorganized swarm, but as a perfectly coordinated hunting pack. Their ships were sleek, dagger-like things, designed for speed and predatory elegance, their hulls reflecting the distant starlight like the scales of a vast cosmic serpent. They did not hail the Maternal Fury. They did not issue threats or demands. Their communication was a single, unified act of violence, a concentrated volley of hypersonic kinetic projectiles fired from their lead vessels with the cold precision of a surgeon's scalpel. It was not meant to destroy. It was a test shot designed to cripple engines and shred outer hull plating, a predator disabling its prey before moving in for the kill. It was their way of saying hello. On the bridge of the Maternal Fury, the impact alarms blared. The ship shuddered, but it was the shudder of a mountain shrugging off a pebble. The new armor, forged in the fires of the hive and hardened by the best human engineers, held. Commander Kaelen Vex did not flinch. She did not order a return volley. She simply watched the tactical display, her eyes tracking the elegant, lethal dance of the Vol formation. They were testing her, probing her defenses, looking for the predictable, brute force response of a soldier. They were looking for the woman who had smashed a hive. They would not find her. Rourke, she said, her voice a calm center in the storm of incoming data. Analyze their firing pattern, plot the source trajectory of that volley. I want the exact coordinates of every ship that participated. Already have it, Commander, the sergeant responded, his hands flying across his console. Their good, almost perfect synchronicity. Almost is the key, Kaelen replied, a ghost of a smile touching her lips. It was not a pleasant expression. They move as one, think as one. It's their greatest strength and their greatest weakness. She turned to her communications officer. Open a channel. Tightest beam you can manage. I want to speak to the lead ship and only the lead ship. The channel hissed open. The Vol commander's face resolved on the secondary viewer reptilian, smug, its forked tongue flicking out in a gesture of contemptuous amusement. So the human mother finally shows her face. It hissed, its voice a sibilant mockery. We expected a more impressive display. Your resistance is as pathetic as your species' reputation, for Kaelen did not let it finish. She spoke over it, her voice not raised in anger, but layered with a chilling, analytical coldness that was far more terrifying. Your synchronicity is off by 0.04 seconds on the portside flank, she stated, her words crisp and clear. A minor hormonal imbalance in your third pilot, likely from a recent dominance challenge he hasn't fully recovered from. It creates a hesitation in your turn and burn maneuver. An exploitable flaw. The Vol commander's smug expression froze, the flickering of its tongue ceased. The absolute silence from the other end of the channel was more telling than any outburst of rage. She had not responded to their attack, she had dissected it. She had looked at their perfect, terrifying display of force and seen not a threat but a data set. And she had found a crack. Before the Vol commander could formulate a response, Kaelen's fingers danced across her command console. Helm, execute maneuver Theta 7. On my mark, now. The Maternal Fury, a vessel known for its devastating broadsides, did something entirely unexpected. It pivoted with a grace that belied its mass, presenting its smallest profile to the enemy, and unleashed a pinpoint, surgical burst of ionic energy. The blast didn't target a ship. It targeted the precise point in the void where the lead Vol vessel's next evasive maneuver, calculated by its own predictable algorithms, was about to take it. The ionic burst washed over the Vol ship's shields, not to breach them, but to scramble its sensors for a single, disorienting second. the ship lurched, its flawless formation momentarily broken as its systems rebelled. It was a stumble, a tiny, almost imperceptible loss of face in the middle of a duel. To the Vol, a species built on the public perception of perfect, predatory grace, it was a humiliation worse than a direct hit. Kaelen didn't press the advantage. She didn't fire another shot. Instead, she leaned forward, her eyes locked on the stunned Vol commander. Her voice, when she spoke again, was no longer cold analysis. It was a low, vibrational promise that carried the weight of a dead hive cluster behind it. "I am Kaelen Vex," she said, and this time she opened the channel to the entire Vol fleet, broadcasting her words on every frequency, a declaration for all of them to hear. "Mother of Liam, you have tested my defenses, you have seen my patience, you now have a choice. You can turn back now, and you may live to hunt another day in another system far from here." She paused, letting the offer, which was really no offer at all, hang in the void between them. Or, she continued, her voice dropping into a register that felt like the first tremors of an earthquake. "You can press this attack. You can become another lesson, etched into the wreckage of your ships and the history of your species, explaining in exquisite and permanent detail why you never, ever threaten a human's young." The silence that followed was absolute. On the view screen, the flawless Vol formation, a testament to millennia of predatory evolution, wavered. For the first time in their recorded history, the ships did not move as one. A hesitation rippled through the pack. The lead ship, its sensors still clearing, held its position. The others held theirs, their commanders waiting for an order that did not come. They had come for a glorious battle against a legendary warrior. They had found something else entirely, a mathematician of wrath, a strategist of retribution who understood their culture of shame better than they did themselves. They had not found a soldier to defeat. They had found a mother who had already won, and was merely deciding whether or not they were worth the effort of adding to her collection of object lessons. The choice, for the first time, was not theirs, it was hers. In the echoing silence that followed the Vol fleet's reluctant, shame-faced retreat, a new understanding began to permeate the cold, dark spaces between stars. Diplomatic channels hummed, not with threats or demands, but with revised tactical analyses and frantic cultural studies. The great empires and fledgling alliances of the galaxy were forced to recalculate their entire perception of humanity. They had long ago learned to respect the human soldier, their tenacity, their courage, their frustrating inability to know when they were beaten. But that was a simple, quantifiable metric of warfare. What they witnessed now was something that defied all their algorithms and logic. They learned, in the most visceral way possible, that while a human soldier fights for a cause, a human mother fights for a forever. And that distinction made all the difference in the universe. A soldier can be reasoned with, bargained with, or broken. A mother whose child is threatened recognizes no borders, acknowledges no treaties, and accepts no surrender except the absolute and permanent removal of the threat. The galaxy learned a new, chilling truth. Human soldiers are to be respected, but human mothers are to be feared. Later, in the quiet sanctuary of the commander's quarters aboard the Maternal Fury, the echoes of that galactic lesson felt a million light-years away. The air was still, carrying only the soft hum of the ship's life support and the rhythm of a little boy's breathing. Liam was tucked beneath his blanket, his head resting on a pillow, the day's fears finally chased away by the familiar, solid presence of his mother sitting on the edge of his bunk. The terrifying figure in scarred armor was gone, replaced simply by Mom, her face softened in the low light, her voice a gentle murmur. She smoothed his hair back from his forehead, her touch a silent promise that the monsters were gone. Leaning close, her lips nearly brushing his ear, she whispered the words that had become their nightly ritual, a spell against the darkness of space. "Sleep well, my love," she breathed, the words infused with a certainty as vast as the void outside. "The stars are safe tonight." And beyond the thick, armored viewport of his room, those very stars glittered cold and infinite. But stationed among them, a silent, watchful sentinel, was the formidable shape of the starship that bore her name. The Maternal Fury hung in the void, its running lights a steady, rhythmic pulse against the blackness, its weapon systems idle but its sensors sweeping the endless night with relentless vigilance. It was no longer just a warship, it had been transformed into a monument, a promise made manifest in durasteel and plasma. It was the guardian of that whispered lullaby, the enforcer of that safety. It stood watch, a silent, unwavering declaration to any power, any species, any shadow that might ever again look toward a human child with predatory intent. The lesson of the Xylos hive was complete. The warning to the Vol had been delivered. The ship, like the woman who commanded it, was a permanent fixture in the celestial tapestry, a reminder that this mother's wrath was not a temporary fury to be weathered, but a fundamental, eternal force of the universe for